Welcome back to Think, the podcast with me, Dylan Schreibman. I'm so glad that you're here. I'm so glad that we get to explore another conversation together. Today's topic that we're thinking about, feeling stuck and being in that waiting period. Before we begin on that journey, I do want to make a note that I'm aware that when this podcast is posted, the inauguration will have taken place and the second term of the president-elect will have officially begun. I am taping this before that happens, but I have not forgotten the fears around this second administration. If you're feeling the same things of fear, your feelings are validated. As we speak, the House has already passed anti-trans legislation in this new Congress term, and it's on its way to the Senate. I want to let you know that this podcast is always a safe space. I see you, I hear you, I love you, and I accept you. And I want to let my LGBTQ plus community know the world feels heavy during this transition period. So if you need to take a break, if you need to take a bit of a rest, that is okay. Today's topic of conversation really brings up a lot of questions for me. What makes us feel stuck in life? Why do we feel stuck in life? What feelings come when we feel stuck in life? When does it end? But first, I kind of want to give the definition of feeling stuck according to my personal experience. To me, feeling stuck is when you have closed one chapter, outgrown that chapter, and you're waiting for the next chapter to arrive. For a lack of a better analogy, you start reading a book and you have finished chapter one, but there's this kind of waiting period in between before you can start chapter two. It feels like you're kind of waking up each day, going through the motions with no emotion or no excitement, but at the same time, you are overthinking everything and wondering if those things are going to arrive. Do you know that TikTok sound of like when they place it over Hotman, it's like storyline, place name, blah, blah, blah. It feels like that, but you throw in a side of nervousness and overthinking. And that's what feeling stuck to me feels like. You feel like you're stuck in the dirt, so per se. I think that could answer actually the first question of what makes you feel stuck. I think the simple answer to that is when you've outgrown something. A lot of the times when we outgrow something, we feel it in our heart for a longer time than we should. We kind of have this gut intuitive feeling that we should follow, but we're scared to follow. We get complacent. I know I've learned lessons with that. I feel like the reason we get complacent is because it's comfortable, and being comfortable is a lot easier than taking that risk that we know that we should take to move on to that next chapter. I feel like being stuck, even though it's hard, is actually a really beautiful thing in disguise. We don't learn that until we're in the next chapter, but during it, it feels heavy. After, it feels like it was necessary to go through. Because during the stuck phase, we get to rediscover ourselves and who we are. We get to discover new things that we like while we shred those old things that we thought we liked and we don't like anymore. We get to reflect on our behaviors and also how other people treat us. We learn, especially in dating, what we like and what we don't like. You can even classify that to friendships. And as we're in this stuck period reflecting, we get to say, oh, I don't like how that person treated me. Why did I allow that person to treat me like that? And we get to move forward. Nobody comes in your life by accident. And during this period, we get to do an inventory check of, okay, yes, you can stay in my life during this next period, or no, your tribe has spoken, as they say in Survivor, and we get to vote them off the island. We also get to use this period to check in on our purpose and see if what we're doing is aligned with that purpose. We get to use this period to check in on our career and see if we are on the right path and doing the things that make us feel free. And sometimes, in some situations, we can do inventory and say, oh no, this job isn't serving me anymore. While I'm grateful for it and it served a purpose in my life, I feel like I've outgrown it and there's nowhere to grow or no further room to grow in this position. Then we can start looking what we feel like should be next. I saw a quote that really helped me during this transition period of mine, and I related to and I feel like can relate to this topic. So I wanted to share in case it helped anybody else out there. It says, if you choose the ache of walking away over the emptiness of staying, you should be ridiculously proud of yourself. I am a person that what I've learned is I can get complacent if I feel comfortable. And it's easy to say, okay, I'm in this chapter. And in this chapter, I know what I'm getting out of this chapter. I know what I'm going to wake up to each day. I know what's going to happen in my life. So I'm going to stay in the comfortable. And I think I do that because I have a fear of the unknown. If I take a risk or I leave that chapter, I don't know what's coming next. I still don't know what's coming next. And that's scary. And so it's easy to say, okay, let me just stay in chapter 4 of my story instead of seeing what's wonderful in chapter 5 because you just don't know what's coming. I finally said, okay, Dylan, I feel like things in this chapter are no longer serving me. It's easy to wake up and stay in that chapter for a few months longer, maybe than you should, instead of jumping in to that transition period because a fear of the unknown. I am scared of the unknown and not knowing what's coming next. That's the control part of me. And B, it's just like, okay, I know what's coming each day. I know I'm going to wake up and do this, this, and this, and I'm comfortable with that. And eventually you get to a point where that emptiness does start to come in and you're like you wake up a few months maybe after you should and say, wow, this is no longer serving me. I am grateful to experience this chapter. I needed this chapter to grow from the previous chapter in my life, but I think it's time that I move on. And that is hard when you do not know what is coming next. That is hard when you have a fear of the unknown like I do. To take a bit of a risk on yourself is challenging because obviously we live in the present. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. We don't know if it's going to work out, but we have to be confident enough to say, okay, you know what? I am going to take this risk on myself and I am going to move forward because this chapter is no longer serving me. The ache part really got me because I was sitting in that chapter empty and unfulfilled. And I could have sat there for a few more months easily because it was comfortable. But the short-term ache of taking that bet on yourself or realizing, okay, this no longer serves me, I need to find what's next, you'll heal from that. I know I'll heal from that. I think I faced it this way. I was like, which will you regret more? If I stay and continue to live the life that I was living, or I take 6 months and bet on myself and see what turns out and what happens. I am fortunate enough to be in a situation where I don't really have any responsibilities that tie me down to a certain city. I know everybody's journey is different, and I want to make clear everybody's responsibilities are different. So I do want to put that note in there. But I didn't want to look back in 10 years and say, now I do have responsibility where I can't move or can't maybe take a risk. But I could have gone for this 10 years ago. I could have gone for this when I didn't have those responsibilities and whether that be a relationship, children, whatever. I could have gone for that when I was 28 and I didn't. And so I think that's what kind of led me to say, I am going to take this risk. And while it is probably the most uncomfortable thing I've ever done in my life, or one of them, I can at least look back and say that I tried. I also thought to myself, I've taken a risk before and I'm still here. I made it through, and the risk that I did take at the time worked out in propelling me to that next chapter and out of that old chapter that did no longer serve me. That was when I moved to LA, which I want to talk a little bit more extensively about one day. But I moved to LA on a whim. I remember sitting in my family home and saying, I was always told by a family member, Dylan, and my brother was told the same thing, but they always said, Dylan, you have to move to LA. LA's for you. Like, you'll love it. You'll fall in love with it. I remember my dad at the time, when I was making that decision, said something so powerful to me that sticks with me to this day. He said, you don't want to look back in 5 years and regret not doing it. And if it doesn't work out, at least you can say that you gave it your all and you tried. And so one day he told my brother and I, he brought out a calendar and he said, pick a date and you're going. I needed that push. I needed that push so bad, and I'm grateful for that push. And my brother and I looked at the calendar and we picked some date in February, I think February 26th, and the rest was history. We moved on a whim. I knew at the time, I knew one person there. That was it. I didn't move with a job. I didn't even move with an apartment lined up. And it was scary. The whole process, there was so many challenges and so many learning lessons, but it turned out to be a top five decision that I've made in my life. And I fell in love with the city. I'm still in love with the city. And I got so many experiences that I'll remember for the rest of my life and created so many friendships that I will have for the rest of my life because I decided to take a bit of a risk and jump into that fear of the unknown. I know I said in the very beginning of episode one, this is the year of jump in, no fear. And wow, I'm just having a moment on this podcast that I've done that before. And it, oh, that's like when you have like those throwback moments, like those grateful moments. I'm proud of myself for doing that. And it all worked out. I, it took a little bit of time, but I finally recognized while I was there, okay, I made the right decision. And I'm glad I made the decision. And sometimes I just want to say that decision takes time. It is something that I'm learning in this transition period. It won't take, a few weeks and you're like, oh, I made the right decision. Sometimes when we jump into the unknown and we jump into the fear um, part of our life, it takes a bit of time to see if that decision was correct or not. After a certain amount of time, I would say months, maybe a year, give yourself a year, I would say. I'm not an expert, maybe a mental health expert or a therapist can actually comment on that. But after I would say like a year, I was like, okay, Dylan, you made the right decision. I think I'm struggling with that now in this new transition period or stuck period of mine. I am wondering if I made the right decision to leave LA at least temporarily and kind of step into this next journey of mine and where I want to go in my dreams. But I also keep telling myself, A, I've done this before, and B, I've only been out of LA since November, so math, it's been not even technically 2 months since I moved out at the end of November. Um, so I'm telling myself I need to give it a little bit of time to see if I made the right decision. And I don't always think I'm getting sidetracked here, the yapper in me, but I don't always think it's a great thing about this podcast, I guess. We can just have a conversation. I don't always think there's a wrong decision. I think there's learning lessons, but I think no matter what I decide in a few months, or whenever I decide it and I know if I move back, I don't think that's a wrong decision. I think I was here for a reason and I moved back temporarily for a reason. I'm not going to blame myself for saying, oh, you should have never moved. Sometimes I still do have that thought in my mind of like, I think I'm still in that mourning period of, did I make the right decision? And did I jump the gun too fast, so to speak? Or do I regret moving out of LA? I think I'm still in that period, but in my mind, I also know as we're thinking here, I have to give it a bit more time to see. As I said before, being stuck has its challenges. It is, out of all chapters in your life, probably the hardest chapter that you have to endure. It is a life-defining chapter, but you don't know it and it doesn't feel like it. A lot of us want to achieve goals and get to those goals that we set for ourselves, whether that be relationships, whether that be friendships, experiences, career, etc. We have a lot of goals across a lot of areas in our life, and it can feel like you're running out of time. It can feel like you're sprinting and not going anywhere, and that the race will be over before you can get to where you want to go. And that is a hard thing to sit through. I know specifically in career, I've always had talks with my therapist of running out of time, and she always has to remind me that I'm not, but I feel like I am, and I feel like I won't have enough time to do all that I want to do. In dating, a lot of us want to get married. A lot of us want to find the right person, and as we get older, maybe into our late 20s and early 30s, some of us start to really want a serious relationship, but haven't found our person yet. So we feel like we're running out of time and we resort to the defense mechanism of, I'm just not going to get married. I'm not going to find the right person instead of sitting through the feelings because it's easier. It's easier to put on that show and especially in front of other people. It is also hard when you are surrounded by people who are in happy relationships. I know I spoke about that briefly in the last podcast. It makes it a bit more difficult just because you see what you don't have at the moment. And while you're grateful for your friends that they have found their person and they get to have that experience, it reminds you that you feel like you're running out of time. It is hard to sit in something that is out of our control. And I feel like that's the biggest lesson in this stuck phase that we go through. A lot of us want to be in control at all times. And sometimes we do have to let go of that control and give it to whatever you believe in, whether that's your faith, whether that's the universe, whether that's you just believing everything is going to work out. I know a lot of people say, if it's meant to be, it will happen. And I'm one of those people. I believe in my faith. And so I believe in that. But that's a lot easier said than done to practice, especially when you're an overthinker and you have a hard time accepting things not being in your control. It's hard to sit there and say, okay, I'm only going to focus on the things that are in my control and not focus on the things that are out of my control, whether that be finding the right person or the next career opportunity. I might cut this out, but I always said I've had a weird feeling that I'm going to get married by the age of 32. And as I turn 28 and turn 29 this year, and we're getting a bit closer, that scares me because, again, it's back to that feeling of running out of time. I feel like I still have so much I want to accomplish, and running out of time or feeling like you're going to run out of time is a tricky thing. I'm trying to think of a useful analogy for it, but it's really hard. I guess the only thing I can think of is a sports analogy. Maybe you're trying to fit a 400-meter race into a 100-meter race. That's kind of how it feels. If that makes, I don't even think that makes sense, but we're just going to go with that and move forward. Um, again, not knowing his sports. No, I'm kidding. I actually am into sports, but I don't know if that analogy was A good one. If you have a better analogy, let me know. Uh, but that's kind of how it feels. In traffic, they say it's like, maybe this is a better one. Okay. In traffic, or when you're sitting in traffic, people are like, how's their traffic? Like, all cars should be moving, right? Or whatever. And people are saying, well, you're trying to fit 10 pounds of crap into a 5 pound bag. That's how it feels like if you're running out of time, or you feel like you're running out of time. It feels a constant race in your mind to, okay, I want to accomplish all this, but I'm getting older. I feel like the 20s are a time to find yourself and to explore. Maybe I'll do an episode on that one day, but it also can be challenging when you're in this age range to be calm and realize that and change your perspective to say, okay, if it's meant to be, it will happen. I know that I'm in this chapter for a reason, and I've been in a chapter like this before when I was about to level up and move into the next phase of my life. But it's a thing that, it's a thing that is easier to say to maybe somebody maybe a friend. It's easy to say to your friend, "Oh, girl, don't worry. I've been in that chapter before. I've felt stuck before and I've made it out and I've found my person and I've found that career opportunity. You'll find it. You just gotta, you know, keep going. You got this." Like, it's easy to say that to a friend, like, you'll get through it. But it's harder to accept it when you're in it. Emotions are a big thing in feeling stuck. I think it's an easy period to feel lonely and sad and confused. It feels almost like you just want to shut down and be alone. Have you ever had those moments where you just want to shut down, isolate, and be alone and not talk to anybody because there's a lot on your mind? It feels like that, but day after day after day. And it sucks because you don't want to push the people away that love you and that support you. But at the same time, you just don't have the capacity or the energy to constantly be that bright light that they're used to you being. I always say don't dim your light, but sometimes life does and you have to fight it. It sucks when you see somebody lose that sparkle and you're in the stuck chapter of your face. All you want to do is be alone. And you don't want to talk to anybody, you don't want to text anybody, you don't want to call anybody. Messages go unanswered for a little longer, maybe than they should. Calls go further in between each call than they should. And the feeling of sadness I feel comes from you're grieving that old chapter that you outgrew, even though you don't notice that in the moment. I think there is a mourning period and a mourning period of putting that old chapter to bed and saying RIP and I'm moving forward. There's a lot you have to shed about yourself, a lot of old behaviors, which is difficult that you're used to doing, a lot of old habits that you have to unform so you can move into that next chapter stronger and prepared. There's a lot of confusion of when it will end and when the next chapter will start because it's a very difficult chapter to be in. It builds character, but it's a difficult chapter to be in. You don't recognize that character until later on. And I think for me at that point, that's when you have to trust your faith. You have to trust God to say, okay, God, I know you've pulled me out of this before. I know I've been in a stuck or transitional phase in my life before, and after was a great blessing and what I prayed for. During the time, you don't see it, but you trust it. I feel like being stuck and transitional as you get older is a bit different just because when you're in your when you've been through it before, you can say to yourself, I know I'm going to get out of this because I've been through it before, and what came after was what I prayed for. That's a lot easier said than done. It's a constant battle of, okay, I'm pulling myself out of this, the emotional side of it and looking at the logistical side of it or the spiritual side of it to say, okay, Dylan, or whoever, I've been here before and I've made it through. I've done this before in my life. I can do it again. It may take a little longer. We may have to be patient, but I can do it again. That's easier said than done because the emotional side comes in and overtakes that and clouds that vision of, oh, am I really going to make it out of this? Like, why don't I feel like myself? I feel like that's the biggest question in the feeling stuck phase. Like, why don't I feel like myself? Why don't I feel like myself? Like, I treat people nice. I do the best that I can. Why don't I feel like myself? And I think as I get older, I think I've discovered the answer to that is because you're shedding that old version of yourself and you're rediscovering, as I said earlier, who you are. And so there will be a period where you don't feel like yourself or you feel like you're losing yourself just to bring in that new person that you're supposed to be. And it sucks. It absolutely sucks. I feel like losing yourself during the transitional period is one of the worst things you can go through because you know it's happening. You know you're losing yourself, but there's nothing you want to do about it. You know you're pushing away the people that you love and that support you, but you don't know what to do about it. It's like you're going downhill. You know that you can't stop, but you continue to go. Eventually you stop, and that's when you hit the next chapter. But it's like you're trying to walk one foot in front of the other every day just to make it through. But you don't want to. And each day gets harder and harder and harder, like an uphill, it's like an uphill battle. You know, eventually you'll make it to the top, but you're going to take a lot of breaths on the way there and a lot of pauses and a lot of breaks and a lot of reflection. And when you're at the bottom of that mountain, it sucks. It absolutely sucks because you look and you're like, oh my God, I have all that progress to make to get to the top. I have that such a long way to go to get to the top. It's worth it at the end, but during it's challenging. And I know why you lose yourself, or I think I know why at this age, because I've been through it before. You're shedding that old version of you and stepping into that new version. So you need to lose part of yourself or lose yourself to step into that new version and rediscover yourself. And I know that's why I think as we get older, we know that we'll make it through and we'll get there, but it's still challenging. I keep telling myself I've been here before and I made it through, so I can make it through again. And that's when you rely on your spirituality and God to get you through. I'm like, I know God has put me here before in this chapter to get me to the next one. And I've made it out and I've gotten to that next chapter and what I've prayed for. But sometimes you just want to say, God, why? Also tells me the other day if you're spiritual and you have a relationship with God, ask God what you're supposed to learn during this season ask him to present what you're going to learn during this season. And I don't know if you always get an immediate answer, but I think one day you will. My advice would be just do it. I know that sounds like a little stupid, but you're not going to want to. There are going to be times you want to give up, and there are going to be times that you're absolutely broken. But the more you just, there are going to be times you don't want to get out of bed, but the more you just step forward and do it, you'll get to that top of the mountain. And use your support system. I think that was my other greatest piece of advice because it's easy during these seasons not to. It's easy to isolate, it's easy to push away because of the sadness in the morning. But there are people that are there for you, and those are people that have been there for you in the previous transitional periods. And when you felt stuck in the past, they've been there for you, and they'll be there for you after too. And the next one that you enter, there are some people that won't, and you'll realize that during these periods. And it's okay. I don't think everyone's in your life are meant to be in your life forever. Some people are meant in your life that are the lessons that put you in this period, or some of the lessons. You'll find out why. You will find out why. May not be as quick of an answer as you want, but the clarity will come and the answers will come. And you'll look back one day and know exactly why. The world needs you. You are here for a reason. I do want to say to wrap this up, feeling stuck is when you're in it the hardest chapter you'll ever go through in your life. It will break you. It will make you want to give up. But at the end of the day, it means you're on to greater things. It means whatever you're praying for and you're aligned for is coming next. And when you get there, you will know why you went through this chapter. You will know that you have shed that old side of you and moved into that new person. Love you. And know that this podcast is a safe space for you if you need it. I'll see you next time.